Welcome to the Seattle Sports Union podcast. I'm your host, Matt the Delightful Duck, and joining back again here with Brian the Soulman Solack. And a shout out to Abraham, who's running the boards today. This week we have a special guest, formerly of the Seattle PI, co-founder of Baseball America, Colorado Rockies baseball writer, and InsideTheSeams.com webmaster and main writer and owner, Hall of Fame baseball writer, the Cowboy, Tracy Ringolsby. Thanks for joining us. That's quite the intro.
Thanks for inviting me.
We're happy to have you here.
Absolutely.
And you forgot the website. Welcome to 7220.
Okay.
University of Wyoming.
Okay.
Okay.
Of course.
Highest elevation of any Division I school, 7250.
Wonderful. So Brian, you had a question here.
I do. Tracy, I hear you're a big deal in the state of Wyoming. Will you care to share why you're such a big deal in the state of Wyoming? I've read up a lot of history about you, but I'd love to hear it from you.
Well, I don't know that I'm necessarily a big deal in the state of Wyoming, but it's just, when you've been someplace a long time, my dad's mother's family were three of the four original settlers out in Pine Bluffs, which basically told me that they were hiding from somebody, that they didn't want to be found. But they were, originals in that regard. And then my mother's family, they didn't move there till she was 10 years old. They were coal miners out of Kentucky, and my grandfather was John L. Lewis's vice president on he was the number two guy to John L. Lewis. He was on the Truman whistle stop train, in fact. Okay. But they came to Rock Springs to mine the coal. It was a big coal mining town back then. So it's none of them were really big timers, except I guess my grandmother. She was the Democratic state chairman, and one time she had the senator, Gail McGee, and one of the congressmen were Democrats elected in Wyoming, where it's 19% Democrat and 81% Republican. So it was a pretty good feat. She was very proud of herself.
Yeah.
Very nice. Right on.
So growing up in Wyoming, just curious, we know where you eventually led. I was just curious, did you ever play any baseball as a kid?
A little bit, not too much, but we were actually in Southern California for 6 years because my grandfather, that was a railroader, he had decided he wanted us to move out there so we could all be together, and he could move out of his one room down at the building that was across the street from the state capitol in Colorado. So grudgingly, my parents packed everything up. We moved out there, and once we bought a house and got settled in, he went back to Denver and went back and got into his one room across from the state capitol there, because then he decided we wouldn't be there to bother him over moving back to Wyoming. So we were there for 6 years till we came back to Wyoming.
Okay. Obviously, we all know that you're a sports writer, but is that what you wanted to be as a kid, or was there another job that you were thinking about growing up?
Kind of fall into it, or?
Well, it kind of fell into it. I mean, back then there were two papers in Cheyenne, the Tribune, which was the evening paper, and the Eagle, which was the morning paper, which were later combined because they were owned by the same ownership. And they always hired a high school senior to be the sports editor for the evening newspaper. And one year, a friend of mine was offered the job, but he decided he wanted to be a male cheerleader instead of a sports writer. And so he convinced him to hire me. And from that point on, I started working every day till today, doing sports. And it was a learning experience because the gentleman that was the editor of the paper there, his name was Jim Flincham. He'd been the head of European operations for United Press International. And then he went down to Dallas and was the head of the Southwest region for United Press International. And then decided that he had two daughters that were about to go to school, and he wanted them into a smaller community. So he took the job as the editor of the Tribune. He was making $30,000 a year. And when Cliff Hansen became a senator, he tried to hire Jim, who was the most Republican of all Republicans, to be his chief of staff and offered him 85,000. And Jim said, "No, I can't sell out and go to work for a politician. I'm a newspaper man." So he kept his $30,000 and stayed in Cheyenne.
Nice.
Did your friend, the cheerleader friend, does he take credit for you being the baseball writer that everyone knows?
No, I don't think so. I don't really see him very often. So
Okay.
he's not living in. I don't think he's living in Cheyenne any longer.
Okay.
Nice. I gotta ask. Matt mentioned your nickname's the Cowboy. What is there a story behind your nickname, the Cowboy, besides the fact that you're from Wyoming and probably on a ranch most of your life? Or
Actually, no. It's a nickname that I got when I was traveling around in the baseball circles.
okay,
It wasn't really. It wasn't anything from anybody in Wyoming. They would laugh at the fact that I'm the Cowboy. I'm not the most agile person on earth, and there's so many like legitimate cowboys in Wyoming. I mean, big time guys that I'm just. It's just kind of almost a joke, but it's what I'm proud of.
nice.
Brian, go ahead. You had a
Oh,
question?
just moving on. Your first major league job was with the California Angels. I have to ask, why did you go there? Is it because Roy Rogers owned the ball club?
Well, actually, my first job was when I was the UPI guy in Kansas for a year.
Okay.
And from that point, I don't know exactly how, but I got offered the job at the Long Beach Independent Press Telegram, which was a really pretty good newspaper back in those times. And my attitude, my thought process was, if I don't make a move now, I'll be a wire service guy for life, which wouldn't have been true because they wound up folding UPI. I would have been out of work sooner than I was when they folded the morning news. So
Yeah.
so I took the job there because I liked baseball. It was a thing I really liked to focus on. I thought it would be interesting to live in Southern California for a while and see. And I took that opportunity, and that was kind of the step I followed for a while till I got back to Colorado. When you consider I went back to Kansas City at the Star for 3 years,
Okay.
and then I went to the Dallas Morning News. It was after Seattle. I did that. In Seattle for 3 years, Kansas City Star for 3 years, and then I went to Dallas, and I wound up, that was a heck of a newspaper back then, and it was a great newspaper war, and it was fun to be part of it because they wanted to do things. I mean, there was no scrimping on expenses or anything there. Yeah. And I enjoyed that. So I wound up staying 6 years and never really thought I'd leave. And in the off season there, I'd wind up doing a lot of, because they were starting to play night football games, and our football writers weren't used to writing on night deadlines. And as a baseball writer, my boss decided, you can do this and you can go ahead and cover it because you're used to writing on deadlines, and you know that you have to get it into the paper, or it doesn't make any difference how well you write. One year I think it was like the Thanksgiving week where they'd have all the holiday games and stuff, and the NFL would play on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I think I did 5 games in 8 days.
Wow.
Between Texas and Texas. So, and then when I wasn't, I was really lucky in Texas because became very close friends with the late and great King Kong Bruiser Brody, and I would spend my free time during the winter driving around to him to different matches in the Midwest. It was better than being home with my second ex-wife.
Okay.
You mentioned covering a little bit of football there. I'm curious, being from Wyoming and University of Wyoming grad and all that.
No, I'm not a grad. I didn't go to go to college.
You worked there.
Yeah.
Are you as big a Josh Allen, being the big man from Wyoming, of the Buffalo Bills, the quarterback?
he is the epitome of what Wyoming's all about. What you have to
Okay.
remember about Josh is when he came out of high school, he grew up 40 miles from Fresno, right? And they wouldn't let him walk on at Fresno. So
Yeah.
he went to a junior college. He went to a junior college for a year. And he was offered, after that, he was offered by Wyoming and Eastern Michigan. Those are the only two schools that made him an offer. And over to a lot of the people is when you go back to the, the year before he went out to the NFL draft, he'd gotten hurt. And we were playing in a bowl game, and Coach Bull said that, Josh wasn't going to play because of the injury. He didn't want to do anything to do anything to hurt his opportunities in the NFL. And Josh made the announcement of, that's nice for him to say, but I'll be in charge of this, and I'm playing in the game, because if it wasn't for the University of Wyoming, NFL wouldn't care about me to begin with. And that, I think, that spoke for his loyalty. And last year, his dad and mom came to a game in Laramie, and his father sang the national anthem.
Okay.
And Josh comes back on campus every year for a week or two just to kind of be around it. Once start bringing in the players for the summer workouts, Josh will show up in Laramie and spend some time. He's as loyal to the Wyoming athletic department as the Wyoming fans are to him. Very few things happen involving him that doesn't create some type of a reaction in the state because of what he meant to the people there, that he was willing to be a Wyoming Cowboy.
Wow. Right on. I got to ask for our producer, Abraham. He loved Bruiser Brody. I mean, is it true that he legitimately intimidated fans and his opponents, or care to share?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how he got stabbed to death in Puerto Rico by one of the other wrestlers. I mean, that's where he died. He was a big time football player in college out of the North. He was out of Michigan, and I think he went to I want to say Texas or Tulsa. Might have went to one a known school, but it wasn't like it was a power school. But they had a lot of chance to play there, and then he picked up wrestling in the off season to make a few bucks. And I thoroughly enjoyed him. We got along real well in Dallas because he would work the Sportatorium, world famous Sportatorium as they referred to it. Might be the biggest junkyard in America, but it was still the world famous Sportatorium. And at that point, he said I'd done a few stories for him for the paper and stuff because it was big. And he said, well, why don't you come with me on a couple trips in the winter? I go, I got the winter off. I'll go wherever you want to go. Just tell me. So I would jump in the car and we would go. And it was he had ideas on how to market and do things. He was way ahead of a lot of the guys that get into the wrestling.
Okay.
And it hit hard when he got stabbed to death in the shower in Puerto Rico.
I didn't realize that he got stabbed to death. I knew he passed away there, but I'm sorry to hear that. But appreciate you sharing the story.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump back into Seattle. You were there, have you said?
Yes.
Okay. Back then, sports radio was pretty much KVI rate 570 radio, and that's where the Mariners played. And Niehaus, yes, and Ken Wilson and J. Michael Kenyon. I swear I heard you on his show every once in a while. Am I going crazy, or do you remember J. Michael Kenyon?
Oh yeah, because he was the baseball writer in Seattle. Before I replaced him when he went to the radio business.
Okay.
He was at the Seattle. I think he and Hy Zimmerman were the two original beat writers on the Mariners, and J. Michael was from the Post. Was for the Post Intelligencer, was J. Michael, and then when he went to go to radio, he recommended that they hire me to cover the Mariners as they came in. And it was great initially because, Daryl Johnson, I enjoyed. Renee Latchman's probably to this day one of my closest friends in the game of baseball. And then the nightmare of Maury Wills fell upon us. And But that was a tough one for me because as a kid, like I said, we spent like 6 years in Los Angeles, and that's when Morey was playing down there. And my dad was real big. We would sit in the left field bleacher. I think it cost 25 cents for me and 75 cents for him. And we would go as often as we could to games. And as a young kid, it was like Morey Wills was kind of my idol because he's a guy that overcame all the odds. He's a guy who's like 30 years old when he was a rookie, kicked around. And so then when he comes to Seattle, I'm all pumped up thinking this is going to be great. We talked for the first 2 days and didn't talk again. He was so busy and he had a lot of off-field problems. Let's put it that way. And
Okay.
he was also paranoid of everything to the point where we're in spring training, and everybody reports early in spring training, right? And he'd show up at 10 o'clock, 10:30. One day he showed up at noon because he said, "Well, my girlfriend was flying home to Los Angeles, and I didn't want her to be at the airport by herself, so I felt I needed to stay there." And it was one of those things where I was really happy when we quit talking because it was a lot easier not to talk to him. And I don't know that anybody in Seattle was excited about him by the time he left because he was just so much into the off-field incidents, put it that way. And he was ruining his life, and it was sad, particularly for me because I was older and had outgrown some of it. But to realize that this was the guy that as a young kid, I thought the world revolved around him, and then to meet him and have him be that kind of a person was really tough. And he wouldn't know who was on the lineup card when the game would start. He would be totally lost. And it was sad.
Do you have?
But then we had Latch.
Yeah.
Latch was Latch. The thing there was, he was, I think, making $18,000 a year as the manager at Spokane, and they raised him to $25,000 to come to the big leagues.
Okay.
And so he and his wife would house sit. They'd house sit, and then whenever there wasn't a house they could sit, they would bring the 3 dogs and the 2 kids, and they would move in with my wife and I out in the suburbs.
Okay.
And kind of stay there. We had to, keep it quiet because it did not reflect well probably on either one of us. But I've always been a person where, like with the players and stuff, I have a respect for them because they're doing, even the ones that aren't great players are doing things that I could never do.
Yeah.
But it's never been like an idolizing type thing. But I've always felt like as a reporter, it's important to keep relationships so that you can talk to the people when things happen, particularly negative type things that they know you're not in there to embarrass them, but you're in there to get the news and you want to have it accurately. And so over the years, I think I've wound up having pretty good relationships with most of the players and most of the management people. They have their job to do. I understand it. There's things they don't want to tell me. Well, there's things I'm not going to get into them with, but I do think that at times some of the people in our business are more worried about being theatrical than they are providing information. And I think that's still the business of newspapers, is to provide information to the fans, not to provide them with slanted opinions.
Definitely.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite Mariner in your time on the beat here? Favorite person to talk to daily?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. I don't know if you talk to him daily, but I consider my 2 closest friends in the game as far as players and stuff, other than Latch, would be Nolan Ryan, because when we were the Angels and we were in Texas together, and it wasn't baseball that we talked about, it was cattle and that type of stuff. And we would in rodeos. Yeah. In fact, he's come up to Frontier Days 3 times in the last 10 years to take in the world's largest and oldest outdoor rodeo, Cheyenne Frontier Days. And we stayed close, but it was never like to get caught up in what he accomplished. Although I would say he's probably did more than anyone ever expected, because you got to remember, he was the sixth pitch starter on a 4-man staff with the Mets. he had a very sub 500 record, and he was in a throw-in of the trade for Nolan Ryan or for Jim Fregosi. I'm taking it back.
Yeah.
And Fregosi hated him because he felt like he got traded to the Yankees and had to leave the Angels because of Nolan Ryan. And I said to him once, I go, there you go. He was not the key player in that trade. And the irony is Jimmy winds up managing the Angels, and Nolan's on the team. And Jimmy's looked at me and he goes, you know those things you told me about Nolan? I said, yeah. He goes, well, I'm going to tell you right now, as long as he's wearing our uniform, he's the greatest I've ever been around. And this is, this is a story. I don't know if you want me to wander or not, but
please.
The first spring, the spring that Fregosi got traded, Nolan and his wife are in Palm Springs in spring training, and the players are going to go on strike. And Nolan said, you know what? This hasn't worked out the way we wanted. I wanted it to, being a baseball player because of the New York stuff and that. He goes, maybe we need to just pack bags and go home and get the cattle moving on the ranch. And his wife said, Nolan, you like this Tom Morgan, who was the pitching coach? He said, yeah, he's been pretty good to me out here in the spring. And she said, I think we should give him 1 year. And if at the end of the year you think it's a mistake, then we'll go home. And he said, well, then I better go down to Texas and get some money so we can afford to get our apartment and stuff. And so he flew down and he got back and he said, I got $25,000. We're in pretty good shape. And I tease him now because that became tip money.
Yeah.
Right on. Besides Colorado, do you have a favorite team that you covered? I mean, it's okay to admit the Mariners were your second favorite team of covering of all time.
You know what? It was hard not to enjoy that Royals team because that was the peak of their time. I enjoyed Seattle a lot because of just the players. They were there trying to prove something and trying to make a move. I can't say that. The only place where I ever went and I said I'm not going to leave was when I came to Denver, because that was home, right? It wasn't any of the other stuff. It was for me in a vagabond type thing. But I always enjoyed the movement I was able to have in the other cities because of the doors that opened for me as far as relationships with front office people, with scouts, with players, because it wasn't the same guys every year that you find a lot. And I'm not saying guys are wrong for wanting to go someplace and stay in there. I did that when I got to Denver because that was as close as I was going to be to home. I mean, my dad and I used to go down there every 7 years when he had to trade in a car, we'd go down and check the lots in Denver as well as Cheyenne. So, it was our big city. We don't have big cities in Wyoming. Cheyenne's almost 60,000. It's one of the four. It's the largest city in the state. One of four with more than 30,000.
Wow, a lot smaller than Seattle, but I didn't think it was that.
It's about half the size of Everett, where I live. Yeah,
yeah. No, it's. I think it's the 10th largest landmass and like the second smallest, if not the smallest, population of any state.
Yeah.
In Alaska, fight over the population part all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Our producer wants to know, were you when you were in Kansas City, was you shortstop Yoel Washington playing?
Yes, he was part of that 1 year where they had some incidents, but yeah, he came in. We had him and we had Buddy Bianca on.
Okay, I remember him.
Shortstops, yeah.
Oh, Abraham wants to know what's the deal with the toothpick and for Yoel Washington. Apparently, he used to have a toothpick in his mouth all the time.
He played with. We don't know. It was his thing. It might have been one of those things, an anxiety thing. Different players will have things they might do just to kind of keep themselves calm in situations. But yeah, no, that was a heck of a team too. I mean, Willie Aikens, unfortunately, one of the nicest human beings you could ever be around in your life, got trapped in by some guys that were dealing drugs and got him, into that whole mess that just about ruined it. But to Dick Hauser's credit, he gave him once he got through his suspension and that was handed down, Dick opened the door back up and brought him back in and did not treat him any differently at that point.
Right
I
on.
remember asking him about it because Hauser and I we'd have a 15-minute session every day, no notebook, no other media, just he and I would just go in and sit and talk about things. I wasn't allowed to take notes. And this gets back to that thing where you kind of get in that gray area, but I always felt I always felt I was learning more by being there than anything else. And I remember when he was dying, I was a visiting writer at that time. I think it was in Texas. And Vogelart came over and said, hey, can you break away for a couple of minutes? And I said, sure, why? He goes, Dick and Nancy are up in Mr. K's booth, and Dick wants to know if you'd come up. So I went up and we were talking, and he said, we were together for 3 years. I said, yeah. He goes, you never asked me for an autograph. I said, I don't collect autographs. He threw this framed news picture at me. He was wearing a cowboy hat and cowboy boots in his uniform. And he said, well, now you have a picture to put on your wall. And I still have it on the
Oh,
That's wonderful.
It's in the feed room in our barn.
That's awesome. What a great story. Right on. 92, you moved on, I believe, to Colorado, which is pretty much before they started the Rockies. Did you have any
before?
Year before? Okay. Did you have any say in who they picked for the expansion draft, or
Yeah.
I mean, how much leeway did they give you there?
They gave me quite a bit. I mean, they brought me in the spring, specifically because they knew we were going to do a lot of work advancing that the baseball team was coming to town. What they didn't expect is go back to Cooperstown, and the ceremony's over, and I'm flying back to Denver, and I call from the airport in Chicago, and I'm changing planes, and I just said, anything going on? They go, yeah, where are you? I said, Chicago. They go, get on a plane to New York. I go, I just left it. They go, yeah, but they just announced that the expected owner of the team here is going to prison. He's from Pennsylvania, and he's going to prison for different things he has done. He was a big time Italian guy, and he'd been involved in a lot of different sneaky trades. And so I went back in, and fortunately, I somehow got in to see the National League president, Bill White, and he and I had always hit it off because his daughter had gone to school in Colorado, at the University of Colorado. And for whatever reason, Bill White, even when he was a player and I was there, we always had a dialogue between each other when he was with the Yankees and I was covering the American League. And he sat down, he said, Tracy, I don't know what's going to happen because we don't have a backup in place to replace the Rockies. We have other cities that are coming after us. And we had a very good he was very good. We had a good conversation. Flew home, and they said Jerry McMorris has popped out of the weeds to bring baseball to Denver after all. Which I'm like, thank God, because what was I going to do next year if I didn't have a baseball team and I was in Colorado, So that was one of the more interesting parts there, where they had to rework all of those things, and it opens some eyes to how tenuous some of these things can really be.
Yeah.
But it worked out, and then I was able to the paper. The sports editor said, "Yeah, we're going to bring in a second guy, so there's two of you." Because we were doing 4 broadsheet pages a day, except on Sunday we'd do 6 between the two of us. And I said, well, I have the guy that I want to come here. And first I had to go in and meet the editor of the paper. The editor said, yeah, we have this guy. He has a love for baseball. I said, look, I'm on my second marriage. I don't want to hear about love. I want to hear about somebody who has a desire to get in and do the things that we're going to have to do with what you want done. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, I think you'll like him. And so then I went to meet the publisher. Well, the publisher the Rocky Mountain News, when I was with UPI in Denver, was a back shop guy. And one of the guys in sports there was a good friend of mine. And I would take over like the ticket. Back then, you got 4 tickets from the Nuggets for every game. You got 4 tickets from the Broncos for every game. Well, I was single. I didn't need tickets. I was going to cover them anyhow. So I would always take the tickets over and we would give them to this back shop guy. Well, the back shop guy was the publisher of the newspaper when I went to work there. And I told him, I go, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with that stuff in the front with our staff. And he said, why? So I explained to him what happened with the editor. And he said, well, first of all, you're going to be here longer than the editor. In fact, you're going to be here a lot longer before they play a game than the editor. He'll be gone. And he said, what do you want to do? I go, well, I have a guy I worked with in Kansas City. We're totally different people. I'm the guy that didn't go to college. He's got his MBA from, it's a Philadelphia school. Anyhow, he's got his MBA from there. He's very good at writing feature type personality pieces. He's not that good on deadline. I'm pretty good on deadline. I'm not really good at writing those long drawn out pieces. I said, I think we would complement each other very well. Obviously, I would do some features. I got no problem with that. But for Jack, every now and then he's going to fill in because you guys are going to actually give me a day off once a week, I've been told. And he'll have to say, yeah, that's true. So we hired Jack. And until the paper folded, Jack and I were the 2 guys on the beat there doing it. He and I to this day are very close friends. And you can't find 2 people with more different interests and desires in life than Jack and I. I mean, I'm the redneck from Wyoming. He's the guy from the East Coast that went to Wharton. Yeah, he went to Wharton. He got his MBA on Wharton.
Okay.
My favorite story on him, if we could, he would do a lot of feature type stuff in the winter. So they sent him up when the high school coach from Cincinnati went up to be the head coach at the Power 5 school, one of those. And I think it was at Notre Dame. I think he was at Notre Dame. And so when Jack's there, he's interviewing the coach, and then he decides, and this was Jack. He was always looking for more to do. I mean, he was not lazy by any chance. And he thought, Digger Phelps is here. That'd be a good story for us to have too. I should go do Digger Phelps. He walks into Digger, says, hey, I'm Jack Edkin. Said, oh, where'd you go to school? He goes, well, I got my MBA at Wharton. And Digger, he said, in fact, when I was at Wharton, I used to go watch you play because that was one of the few things I could afford because I could get in on a student pass. And Digger looked at him and said, you went to Wharton? He said, yeah. He goes, and you're a sports writer? He said, yeah. He goes, you're an embarrassment to the entire school and anyone that ever graduated from it.
Wow. Wow.
I still tease Jack about that every now and then because we still hang out at the press box in Denver together. And I always report. I said, you just embarrass people, Jack. I don't know what else to do.
I have to ask you about the insane 2007 season for the Rockies and see if you have a favorite moment. That was the year that they went on the run for was it 14 of the last 15 games that they won, and then the regular season, and then they had the 1-game playoff, and then they had to jump immediately into a playoff roundabout, and they went all the way to the World Series.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite moment from that team that time?
Just, yeah, I mean, it was fun because there was so many guys enjoying it. Don Baylor was around. It probably when he died, it was really tough. He was probably among the closest people I've ever had in my life.
Okay.
I'd had him in Anaheim before that as a player. He came to Anaheim as a free agent the year I went there as a beat writer. And he and his wife would actually, when he was managing in Denver, they would come up on off days and she'd spend time with the horses, and he and I would just sit and kind of talk about the game of baseball. And when he died of cancer, I was one of the 3 people that had to speak at the funeral, and I didn't know I was doing it till I got there.
Oh.
And I was the first one. And it was difficult because having been around Don, I mean, he was a big guy and he had authority, but he didn't act like that. But everybody knew they weren't going to mess around with him. And they tell the story when he was with the Red Sox, and a few other veteran players, Jim Rice and a couple others, started popping off about Baylor because of this or that. So he just he arm wrestled 4 of them to the ground and wouldn't let them get up, and he quickly won those guys over too. I mean, but he just he was the gentle giant, would be the best way to put it. Simon was a coach, Simon was a manager, and he really related well with the players, because I mean, he's managing an expansion team, and the problem there was Bob Gebhardt was a control freak, and he figured, well, I'll bring Don Baylor in and give him his first managerial job, and he'll do it. He'll just like be at my feet, kissing my feet. Well, that wasn't Don. Don was the first African American to go to Stephen F. Austin High School, and I asked him, I go, well, why'd you do that? Why'd you do that? He said, we live 4 blocks from there. My brother and sister rode buses 40 minutes to school because they couldn't let them in there. I wasn't going to do that. And he said, and it paid off for me. I said, why? He goes, Frank and Ann Seal. I said, yeah, the people that you bring him in at spring training, you have him here doing this. He was my coach, and he was the one that helped me understand what I had to do to make an impression there and not become part of the problem, but part of the solution. And Frank and Ann Seal would be in spring training every year. They'd come up for 3 different visits during homestands. They would be at the postseason when the Rockies got to the postseason, all at Don's expense. He took care of them pretty well because he knew how much he owed them, but what he didn't realize was how much baseball owed them, because they opened the doorway to one of the greatest human beings to ever live, to be part of the game. And if you didn't like Don Baylor, then you didn't deserve to be breathing, so it didn't matter.
Yeah. Wow.
We're running long on time here, but we wanted to touch on your connection with the Hall of Fame, and so I wanted to ask if you've ever voted for anyone that might surprise us, and how you feel about the recent change to being more open about the ballots.
Well, I think I like the fact that they're more open with the ballots, and I was probably one of the people that pushed it the most, because I don't think when you vote on something of that level that you should be embarrassed by your vote, and you shouldn't be willing to stand up and take credit or take blame from people over how you voted. You have the right to vote who you want to vote for. I'm never going to say anybody voted for the wrong person, because they could say that about some of the people I voted for, I'm sure, but I hate the empty ballot. If you don't want to put somebody on a ballot, then don't turn one in. Yeah. Why muck up the accounting department by having a blank ballot turned in? I mean, I think that bothers me. I think a lot of that's done, and then the guys that'll vote for one guy or something. I think that a lot of that type of stuff's done because people want to show that they're tough or they're hard-nosed. Well, this is a Hall of Fame. We're looking at guys that had major impacts on the game, and to not put them in for some silly reason, I don't buy it. I mean, I'm very much in hopes that those 7 votes that Todd Helton came up short will be cast for this year, because he had a big impact on the game of baseball in Colorado. And if you start putting his numbers together, he's in the, like, if you take his offensive numbers as a group, the offensive numbers, he's in the top 5 or 6 all time. And people say, well, yeah, but he was at Coors Field. So you're going to penalize him because so do you not vote for guys because they played at Wrigley Field? Yeah. And the other thing that people don't take into consideration is Coors Field's a great place for hitters, but do you know what it does to go on the road when you've been in Coors Field and in that environment, and now you go to Los Angeles or you go to San Diego, where the whole game is so different as far as your approach? I think the guys that have to come to Coors Field for 2-3 game series get off a lot better than the players with the Rockies who go out for half of their year traveling around to cities at different elevations. And don't tell me you're not going to vote for a pitcher because he pitched at Coors Field. Those guys are very brave.
Yeah, if anything, you should get extra votes for pitching there.
Yeah. So I mean, I think too many times people get caught up with the fact that they want to make a statement with their ballot. Well, the best statement you can make is to look at the cast of people. You're not going to vote for 10 guys every year. I'm going to say that. I usually vote for 5 or 6, but it's, you think it through, and they don't all have to be out of the same type of a player, or they don't have to be the same type of a pitcher. But it's like relief pitchers. I think relief pitchers, with what they've become in the game, they're almost more important than starting. I mean, I remember Weaver used to have, what he didn't have for his pitching staff? 9 men, 4 starters and 5 relievers. And if there was an off day, the 4th starter would get skipped because he wanted to keep the main guys pitching every 4th day. Nolan would pitch like 12 innings, 13 innings. It's like, and let me tell you what, it was not because he had a very small pitch count when he pitched those innings. But it's, I don't know. I guess the athletes aren't as conditioned today as they were before they got all these new fancy conditioning approaches, because it's like they're raving about so and so got through 6 innings last night. It's we're only in June and he's already up to 6 innings. 6 innings. That was the 7th guy in the rotation, not the 5th guy, not the 4th guy, but the 7th guy. I mean, there's something that's missing there when they've taken that ability of the pitchers away from them to be able to go out and pitch. And Nolan's a guy, people look at it, right when he was turning 40, he missed almost a full year. They wanted to give him the Tommy John surgery, and he's like, no, I've heard too much about that. We'll figure something else out. And one of the guys from NASA came in and had this whole workout program for him and stuff. He missed a better part of a year, but he came back. He threw 2 no-hitters after that. So obviously he still had some arms, got over. And he didn't have Tommy John surgery.
Wow. So you were master of ceremonies back in 86 and 92, I believe, at the Hall of Fame. And then you were voted into the Hall of Fame in 2005. What was more exciting, being master of ceremonies or being voted in the Hall of Fame?
Well, it's pretty hard to say that something in my business, it's pretty hard to say anything was more exciting than to actually have your peers vote you into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
I mean, I could try to be humble or something, but it's like that was probably the most uneasy I've ever been in an event, because it's like these guys like really accomplished something, because the players, they're having these sessions, you're having different events, and the players and managers and other writers who were writers that you would grow up thinking, whoa, man, he's really, God, if I could be like that guy, that would be really nice. And now all of a sudden your peers vote you in. It's not like you campaign for it or anything. You get voted in. And that phone call from Jack Lang probably was the most silencing phone call I ever had, because I didn't know what to say. It's like, as you can tell, I can bullshit pretty good, but when that came up, it was like, wow, this is unbelievable. I don't know. I mean, in our business, what honor could you have as a sports writer, as a baseball writer, that would exceed being inducted to the Baseball Hall of Fame? I don't think it exists. But it was, it was pretty neat.
That's awesome.
So I have to ask about Baseball America. I want to hear how you helped to get it launched, and what was the thinking behind it. I'm a former subscriber, and I always still buy the Prospect Handbook every year. I love the publication. I'm just curious how you were involved in the launching of it.
Well, there's a guy that lived in Western Canada. Alan Simpson was Simpson was his name, and he came down in September. He came down to Seattle, and he said, "Hey, I've got this idea." And I said, "What is it?" And he spelled out the real Baseball America, where everything was focused on young players, player development, stories about them, not all these things that they get into now, and the draft. And he said, would you be interested in help me get it started? He said, I know you know some people. Well, you could probably help me to some degree. But he had worked running minor league teams.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like he was. And I said, sure, I'd love to do it. And so we came up with our ideas and we did it. And I think that, this was back before you had the modern age, right?
Mhm.
He would print. He would come across from Spokane. He would come across into Washington from Canada, so he could get the paper printed and stuff. Because then he didn't have to pay the rates to get the paper taken from Canada to the United States, right? Those rates that come up. So then he would come over and he'd go to Bellingham and he would get it printed, and then we would wrap them up and we would send them places. And it was basically a 3-man job, because then a friend of mine, Ken Liker, I talked him into coming in and helping us out too. And so he really helped a lot more on the putting everything together side than I did. But it was something back then in particular. We focused on player development. We focused on the draft. The draft was a huge thing for us. I think the new people kind of got away from some of that. They wanted to be more of a major league type. They still do a lot of the minor league stuff, but they wanted to have more of a major league aspect to it, which I don't blame them. I mean, they put their money in, they should do what they wanted to do. But for me, it was fun because, back then you didn't have instant draft stuff, right? They didn't announce the draft. They were in that spell. And Bob Gebhardt was a general manager in Colorado, and he was a complete control freak. And he'd be so mad because the day of the draft, we'd come out and we'd have, like, when it was over, we'd have like all but 1 or 2 guys in the first round to the right teams, because we had done a good job. Well, I mean, I liked the game to begin with, and so I knew a lot of the scouts. I think that's why Alan came to me anyhow. I knew a lot of the scouts because they'd come in to advance, and you'd sit down and you'd talk to them, you'd meet with them for lunch and stuff, because scouts have always intrigued me, because how do you sit in the stands, watch these games, and know how good those guys really are? I mean, it's to me, it's pretty interesting, particularly when you talk to guys that work their way up in scouting. They started out the amateur level. I watched this kid pitch in Wyoming, and I know that he's going to be a star player. Like my boy that's with the New York Mets now, hitting leadoff, stealing bases. One of the nicest human beings to walk on earth. I mean, if you ever get a chance to sit down and talk to him, he's just one of those guys that it's like he's a dream come true. In fact, the first year he was up with the Mets, they come into Denver. I go over to see him because, I mean, I've known him since he was a little kid, and we used to have a banquet for the American Legion team, because we didn't have the other type of leagues. We had American Legion, that was it. We'd have a banquet for him every year, and I'd bring up a Rockies player, and he was always so excited about that stuff. And then to see him reach the level he's reached, and know that he hasn't changed as a person at all. And I said, yeah, I'm always reading about you doing these things in the wintertime. He goes, well, that's because of you. I said, why? He goes, you know what it meant for me when you would bring in Clint Barmas or Todd Helton, and I could go back in the corner. He said, the night Barmas was there, he stayed for 45 minutes after the banquet and talked to me about baseball and what I needed to look at and stuff. And he said that when I left there and I got offered and I got drafted in the first round, which shocked the heck out of me, I told my brother and my mom and dad and my girlfriend, I'm going to make sure that I always do those things to help young kids get interested in the game. He goes, if it wasn't for Tracy Ringolsby, I'd have never thought I'd have a chance. But he brought those guys up and I got to meet with them. And I'll tell you what that young man did to this day. It's the New York writers say the first year he came up in the big leagues, and I would always go talk to him and stuff. Marty York said one time, Marty, I said, I can't believe you talked to that phony. I said, what do you mean phony? Oh, he's always smiling. He's always happy. He's always answering our questions. We know you can't be that way and be a baseball. The next year, Marty came up and said, you owe you an apology. I go, what? He goes, that's the nicest kid I've ever been around in the game of baseball. He said, he's like a real person. I said, yeah, that's what he's like.
I got last question from me real quick. Inside the
I'll make
scene,
it quick. Sorry, we're running low on time here.
sorry. Inside the Seams, your website started up in 2018. How do you keep it going? I mean, it looks like you write all the articles. If I'm not,
Well, I'll pick up, like with Welcome to 7220, or with the Rockies, if they put out releases and stuff, and they're newsy type releases, I put them in, and I put at the very top, I put the courtesy of whoever the SID, whoever from the SID department writes it, courtesy of so and so University of Wyoming. That's what you see before you go to the story. I don't try to take things and act like I did them.
yeah.
And I always, when I started doing the Wyoming site, I said, you know what? I got to have special areas for the non-revenue sports, because it's not fair to them to be left out. I think they appreciate that. And it's the same thing with the Rockies. I mean, they'll put out a release or something, and if it's one of those hectic days, I'm more interested in finding something a little bit different than what everybody's going to have in their release. So I'll put the release in. I'll put, by whichever guy or girl from the SID department wrote the release and sent it out. Their name's there. This is courtesy of so and so from the Rockies Media Relations Department. I don't have a qualm with that, because I think the readers don't care.
Yeah.
But it gives me time to try to do other stuff, and I try to every day put together a column on their 4 minor league affiliates. How did they do, and that takes more time than you'd think when you're having to track all that stuff down and fit it together. But I think if you're really a Rockies fan, I think that's something that would interest you, is just like, okay, who's playing well at these minor league teams? Because whatever team you're with, your minor league teams are a big part of the future of that franchise. So
Absolutely.
I think it's a value. My
Well-
wife thinks it's
Sorry.
a waste of time, but I think
Well, speaking of time, our time has run out here. Tracy, do you have places people can find you on social media other than that website?
Well, I mean, I'm
On Twitter or?
I'm not on Twitter too much. There's too much stuff there, but I'm on a couple different websites that are sports related. I have InsideTheSeams.com on one website, on the one website, and I have Welcome to 7220.com on the website too, just to try to more exposure, I guess you could say. And it's worked out okay. I've got a few guys I know and stuff that buy some sponsorships on there and kind of help me break even. It's at this stage of life, it's not looking for that next big house to buy. It's just doing something that I still have a passion for. Well, some people might think it's nuts. I mean, when I was a little kid, all I ever wanted to do, what I really wanted to do when I was a little kid was be Vince Scully, but that was out of the question, because
There's only one of them.
well, there's nothing he does that I could have done, or there's nothing he did that I could have done. I mean, he was the guy once he lost his original partner. I mean, he was happy to be the lone guy in the booth by himself. He didn't need that other person there.
So we always like to end our show with upon a positive note with shout outs to family members or friends and anyone we want to call attention to. And I'll let Brian go first, because he usually has about 7 of them.
But we're short on time, so I'll limit it to one. My shout outs to the late great J. Michael Kenyon, who we discussed earlier. That's where I learned about you, Tracy, and my dad finally started getting the PI to where I could read your columns, and I've tried to follow you over the years. So props to you, and props to the late great J. Michael Kenyon.
And Tracy, do you have someone you want to thank or shout out to?
Well, I probably the guy I'd shout out the most to is the late Don Baylor, who taught me a lot about people. I mean, if you're a little kid from Wyoming, then you go places and stuff, and then you get to be around somebody of his quality of a person, and it brings you I think it makes you a better person too, because you start to realize, the things that happened. And I was still very young when we first met, and we were extremely. Here's my Don Baylor story. He's in the hospital dying, right? And I put something out about he'd been moved to such and such a hospital in Los Angeles because he hadn't been in Los Angeles. I get a phone call and he goes, "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You know how many phone calls and how many people are showing up at this hospital because of what you put out on the wire for people to read?" I said, "Well, what's wrong with that?" He goes, "These nurses have a lot of things to do, and these nurses are having to take care of these people." It wasn't anything, it had nothing to do with Don Baylor. He was worried about the nurses being overworked and asked to do too much. He's dying, and he's worried about them having to work too much. And that it's hard to have ever been around a person like that and know that he changed you as a person, and what he had to go through to reach what he did in the game, because he was, like I said, he was the first African American at Stephen F. Austin High School, which was the big time high school in Austin. And what he had to go through growing up, and he could maintain a civility towards everybody around him. To me, was pretty impressive.
Yeah. Well, my shout out is just real simple. It's to my girlfriend Patsy. It's her birthday today. Happy birthday, Patsy! I love you. And with that,
which birthday? Which birthday?
Which birthday?
Yeah.
Anniversary of the 25th birthday.
Okay.
After that, I don't count women's birthdays.
Okay.
So I just want to say thank you for joining us yet again at Seattle Sports Union, and keep in touch with us on social media on Facebook and Twitter at Seattle Sports U is our tag. As well, check out our newly resigned website at seattlesportsunion.com. Keep listening to our podcasts on Spotify, iTunes, Captivate, wherever all major podcasts are found. And now on North Beach Community TV, Saturday mornings at 11 a.m. on Channel 68. You can find us there. Once again, I just want to say thank you, Tracy Ringolsby, for joining us on behalf of the Soulman Solack, Abraham DeWeese on the boards, and myself, Matt, the Delightful Duck. We'll see you guys next time.